Good morning all, or good afternoon, depending what part of the world you're in, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Tom Kasmer, the Product Manager for Geocortex Inline, and I'd like to give you all an introduction today to our latest Geocortex product, Inline. So, here's a summary of today's agenda. First of all, why Geocortex Inline? The Geocortex Inline components that as a whole make up the product. How to build, preview, and deploy a Geocortex Inline view with your data. I'll guide you through the process of exactly how to do it. And finally, let's do it. A live demonstration of how easy it is to create dynamic alignment sheets with Inline. So why Geocortex Inline? First of all, the problem domain. Creating alignment sheets is time-consuming, and the result is a static product that represents a snapshot of your data at the time the alignment sheets were created. The Geocortex Inline solution allows you to create and publish dynamic alignment sheets that are always as up-to-date as your most recent data. And the user experience. Integrity engineers and other users are empowered by viewing up-to-date data for their area of interest and the ability to visualize other related data in context. So what are the Geocortex Inline components? First of all, there's the designer. This is the heart of Inline. It's a graphical view designer with which you can quickly and easily create dynamic alignment sheets. The documentation. Inline has a full set of product documentation, and I'd recommend to anyone that they read through the documentation before creating your first view, as it contains a lot of good tips and examples that you can follow. The data. Inline supports PODs, Esri's UPDM, or any linear reference data model. So long as you have linear reference data for your pipelines, we can use it in Inline and visualize it in Inline. And the data always remains within your network. The web map. Inline uses a web map from your corporate ArcGIS Online account or your enterprise portal. The sandbox. There's a sandbox that is hosted in the Geocortex cloud environment that allows you to preview your work as you proceed. The Inline viewer is the part of the application that you can embed in a web viewer of your choice. And the view, the Inline views are a collection of bands and charts that present your data to your users. And finally, the web viewer. The web viewer is where users interact with a web map and Inline views. Inline supports Geocortex Web, the Geocortex Viewer for HTML5, and Esri's Web AppBuilder. And so now, I'll give you a live demo of the Inline components. When you first open the Geocortex Inline Designer, you see the facility to add a new view or to open one of the most recently modified ones that are stored in either your enterprise portal or ArcGIS Online. Let's open a view that I created not very long ago. So on opening it, you will see a preview of everything that I have configured to date in the view. So before we can go about doing this, there are some prerequisites. So if we click on the info button, for instance, there's some map options that need to be set. We do need a geometry service, and we need a centerline layer from a map service that we will use, as well as other data that we'll use in this example and in Inline. The data itself comes from an ArcGIS map service. It can be either tabular data, as you see the list of tables at the bottom, or it could be instantiated as layers. The only one that has to be a feature class is the centerline layer, which of course needs to be an MOR feature class. The others can be either layers or tables. Inline just reads from the attribute table in either case. It doesn't care whether it's a table or whether it's an actual layer. Next is the configuration of data sources. So you can see here that I've created a number of data sources already. There's an option to import data sources from other views if you'd like to do that, or to add a new data source. You can see that everyone is configured with the URL of the layer or the table that it's referencing. We give it a name, we set the unique ID field, and a few other things. We'll get into this in a little more detail once I give an actual demo of creating a new view. We also need a web map, and this is for use in the sandbox, or if you're deploying to Web AppBuilder, Esri's Web AppBuilder, or Geocortex Web. There's a different process for our viewer for HTML5 that I'll describe as we go through this a little further. And the web map is stored either in your enterprise portal or in ArcGIS Online. There's also what we call a sandbox. So when we have a view that we've done some configuration to, and I should describe the view first. Here we have a view that I've called Integrity. We can see at the top there's a band called Points of Interest. This allows users to create a point of interest at any point along their pipeline route and be able to plot it on the map and have it show up in the point of interest band. There's an ILI band which contains ILI data. You can see there's different options in the band, and you can see it's a scatter chart plot that is plotted. The points are plotted based on their position on the pipeline from 0 to 12 o'clock. The bands can be moved around, so we can change the order of them quite easily. We can collapse them in the designer, reopen them again. We can choose the size that we want, so we might want a medium-sized band rather than a small one, or even a large one if there's a lot of data in it. As you can see, each band can contain one or more charts. So we see down here where we get into an inspection band that we have both scatter plot and linear charts that appear in that band. So we can mix and match these for the right combination to display the data to your users. Once we have done some configuration, what we want to do is to preview our data. So to be able to preview the data, here's where we run it in the sandbox, and this is where the web map comes into effect. And now you'll see that we've got two things going on here. Of course, we have the web map that we had already configured, and now we have the inline viewer at the bottom, in the bottom half of the viewer that I'm showing you, which has a number of components. So the first is to be able to pick your route by use of a rubber band tool, clicking on the map, or be able to just start typing in here and get a drop down of routes that you can choose from. We can enter the start and the end measure values that we want for the section of the route that's of interest to us. There's also scroll buttons that allow us to move along the pipeline fairly easily, and there's a point of interest plotter to use as well. And over here there's a view picker where we can choose a view. In the sandbox there's only one to use because we're working with only one view at a time. There's also a helpful guided tour. So this little icon over here opens the guided tour, which tells new users exactly how to go about using the tools in the inline navigator. So we can click through these until we're done. There are also tips and tricks that we can activate and have a look at, so we can add things to those over time. So to use the tool, just to go back and click on here, now you see that the rubber band tool becomes active. We can click on a starting point. We can click again for an end point. And now you can see that the view that we've configured is displayed with the bands as configured. So there's a point of interest band. There are actions that automatically come with a point of interest band where we can add a point of interest, and you'll see it appears both in the point of interest band in inline, and it plots it on the map. So we can add another point of interest. If we don't want one of these, we can just right click it and we can remove the point of interest, and it removes it both from the point of interest band and from the map. There's also a point of interest selector. So here we can see a tabular list of our points of interest. We can add a new one. We can add more with different methods. We can clear them all, or we can just close that dialog and go back to the inline band. And just to describe the view a little more, you can see that one of the concepts in inline is, of course, the views. A view is a collection of bands and charts. So you can see here, as I was explaining before, that once it's displayed in the viewer, we can see the actual data to be able to preview it. You can see here that we've got labels and tooltips that have been configured. We can see we have multiple data sources in this band at the bottom. So we have multiple charts in here for displaying different things. We can also choose to order this on the y-axis, so we can order by year, we can order by value, we can order by the point on the pipeline, as we have for ILI data, by the o'clock position. And this collection of bands and charts is what comprises a view. In this case, it's our integrity view, and when we're working with it in the designer, you can see that here we have a list of the bands on the right side. If I open one of these inspections, for instance, it has a collection of charts in it, so we can go into the chart options. There's a number of things that we can change. We can hide the title on the startup if we want, or we can display it. We can make them movable. We can make it resizable. We can make it collapsible, or we can remove those options if we want. Also in the designer, another one of the band options is the ability to configure the y-axis options, so our data will display where we want it on the y-axis. In this case, we're using years. We've set the domain from 2013 to 2018 in 6 steps, so the data will appear according to a value that we set. And if we have a look at the chart options, here we can see that we specified a data source for the chart. There's a Y value field that we have selected called inspection year that says where the data is that contains the year data to sort on the y-axis, and we can set the chart type option, so whether it's a linear chart or a scatter plot gives us different options. This is a linear chart, so here we can show a label. We have a function for the label that just shows the tooltip or the label of the chart. We can set the font size, the border color, the border width, etc. And once we're satisfied with the configuration that we've done in the Geocortex Inline Designer, then we can save our work, and let me just save it here, and then we can go about deploying to a viewer of your choice. So the views will be able to be rendered in different map viewers. They can be Web AppBuilder for ArcGIS, it could be the Geocortex Web Viewer, or it could be the Geocortex Viewer for HTML5. So I'll just open the Geocortex Viewer for HTML5. Here we have web map displayed, and we've added an item to the I Want To menu to be able to run inline. So when I click on that, it opens inline in the same manner as you previewed in the sandbox. There's a few more options, of course. You do get the power of the Geocortex Viewer for HTML5 to be able to navigate and use different tools as well. But let's just do the same thing. Let's click on a route, select it on the map, select an extent of that route, and then we can see the results of our work in the view. Now in this particular case, now that we're in a web viewer, we actually can choose from views. So if we have more than one view in play, we can choose to see other views as well. So here I've got one with physical properties that has a number, again, of bands, of charts within the bands, elevation profile, depth of cover, etc. Pipe properties, and the user has a lot of options as well. So the user can open the full name of a particular band to see it. They can choose to move it if they want, so you can or choose to resize it. Let's resize the band and make it bigger. You can also open the dialog. We can choose to move it around, up or down. Or we can collapse it if we want, if we don't want to view it. So we can change the configuration, so it puts a lot of flexibility into the hands of the user. And If we want, if it's not the right range of the pipeline that we have selected, we can use our arrow buttons to move along the pipeline, just scrolling like a typewriter carriage, or we can change the values in the begin and end measure value section. So let's just zoom in to a smaller section of the pipeline, and now we can see the inline bands have automatically been updated to reflect the new extent. So now that you've got an understanding of the process and the components of the Inline Designer and of Geocortex Inline, how do we go about building a new view from scratch? Well, first, we need to set the map options. Next, we need to configure some data sources. Then we need to create a view, add some bands to the view, add some charts to each of the bands, add some functions to the charts if we want. We can see that for tooltips and labels. Then we can preview in the inline sandbox, and finally deploy to the viewer of our choice. So why don't we just give it a whirl? Alright, so let's go through the process of creating a new Geocortex Inline view from scratch. So first, we'll select a new view. You can see that the point of interest band automatically appears by default. And now we need some map options. Rather than enter all the values ourselves, let's just go import map options from another view that we've already created. So let's just choose our integrity view that we were using earlier. I should clean this up, shouldn't I? Alright, so we opened. Now we've got the center line layer, everything configured, so we have all that we need. We have the measure unit, and here we can choose from a list of 5 different units of measure to use for the measure values. You can see that there's help icons next to every one of these fields, which is fairly common in all places in the designer. So if you need any help, you can get context-sensitive help really easily. The number of decimals to display, because you may not want to display some values to 18 decimal points depending on how your data is stored. There's an option to calculate measure values using attributes. If you're not confident in the M values embedded in your vertices, you can also choose to use station notation or not, and if you do, you can choose the number of decimal places after the notation sign to display. In this case, I'll just leave it as 2. So let's save this. Alright, now we want to give it a title, so let's just call this our webinar view. And we'll give it a name. And let's save it. I'm just going to save it from the file system. Here we go. Now you can use the typical shortcut of Control-S to save the view as well. You don't have to actually go to the file save, but I thought I'd show you that just as a starter. Now we're going to want some data sources as well, so let's add a data source or two. You can see the points of interest already comes by default out of the box. So let's just paste a URL in there. I'm going to call this one ILI data because that's what it is. The unique ID field, in this case, will be object ID, which is a fairly common one to use. We can use that in any of the data sources. The center line join field. And then we choose the data point type. In this case, it's a point, so there's a single measure field that we'll want to use in here. And if we want, we can use a custom definition query. It comes pre-configured with the values that we have just input into here. So let's just save that data source. And let's create one more. So in this case, different layer, of course. Let's just call this one risk. And unique ID field, again, let's just use object ID. Centerline join field, in this case, is different, and this is a linear feature, so we have both begin and end measure fields, and I'll save that one as well. Now let me just save my work again. And now let's just add a couple more data sources. In this case, let's just import them. So let's import data sources from another view. In this case, let's just go to physical properties. We'll open that, and now we have a number of data sources to choose from. I'll just save my work again. And now let's just go to the designer and begin to add some configuration here. So point of interest we already have. Let's just create a new band. So here we have band 1 options. Let's just call this ILI. We can also give it a short name. Again, I'll just call this ILI. We can set the accent color. I'll just make this a purple color. That should be fine. And small band height should do the trick for us. I'll just leave the options here by default. Tooltips, we do want to show the label. And the y-axis options, okay, let's just go with a custom configuration. So here we want minimum of 0, maximum of, let's call it 12, and 6 steps there in between. So we may want to actually, I think I'll change it back to only 5 steps. So here, let's make them 3, 6, 9, and 12. By default, the values are automatically populated there, but we can change those if we want. So now that we've configured the band options, let's just add a chart to the band. So here, let's specify chart 1. We need to select a data source, so we'll select ILI data. In this case, we're going to use a configuration to set the y-axis, because in the data, it's actually so here, the orientation field actually has data from 0 to 1 or 360 degrees. So we'll just put a function in here to divide that by 30, so it will show it between 0 and 12. Now the chart type is a scatter plot. So we can add a tooltip if we want. We can add chart display option. So I'm just going to make it a simple symbol. And we can set the border color or the symbol color, etc., symbol size. Let's just change the color. All right, and again, let's just save our work. And then now we've configured the ILI band. So let's just go out of here. Let's just add another band really quickly. And again, the band 1 option. So here we're going to call this, let's just add the risk data here. Different accent color. And we'll just leave this one as small as well. Leave those defaults the way that they are. And the y-axis options here, again, we're going to have a, we're going to make it 0 to 100 in this case. And the steps will be 4. So let's go 0, 35, 65, and 100. All right, let's continue by adding a chart to the band. So in this case, the data source, let's use risk as the data source. And the y value field will be risk. The chart type in this case will be linear. So let's just look at the, look at the options in a minute. Tooltip configuration. So here we're going to paste in a function that's going to concatenate a combination of text values and data from the data source. Let's just reduce the font size a little bit. And let's go to the chart display options. In this case, I'm just going to set it to use random colors, but I do want the line width to be somewhat thicker, so let's just make this 8 points. We can have a label if we want. Return risk, and maybe I'll just leave this at 11 and save our work again. And now we've configured a couple of bounds and a couple of charts really easily in our new view. I'm just going to continue by adding another bound, so let's just get out of the risk. Add another bound, and we'll just call this one pipe properties. Not exclusive. Obviously my spelling isn't very good. We need a spell checker in here. I'll just leave the default accent color and make this one medium. And then let's add some charts. So let's make the first one, let's choose valves. So here I'm going to set the Y value arbitrarily. So let's just set it as 2. We're not going to use a Y value field, and in this case it is a scatter plot. So let's look at the options. We do have a valve symbol, so we may as well use that. And then just save our work again, and we've got the beginnings of another band configured. Go back out of the chart options. Let's go to the y-axis options because I didn't configure these. And here, let's go to 0 to 2, steps 3, and step values, we've got 0, 1, 2, and here I'm going to call this one valves. So we can have an alias here instead of just displaying the numbers. Save our work. So if I add a couple more charts to this one, for instance, I might want to add some crossings. So let's just put crossings in here. And let me just put pipe segments in this one. All right, so let's add another chart. Let's go to the chart 2 options. Again, let's choose another data source. Now, in this case, let's use crossings as an example. Here, let's set this as as 1 on the y-axis. And we know that it's a scatter plot. Let's add a tooltip to this one, just returning the description of the crossing and the symbol and size. So let's just choose a diamond shape. Size of 4 should be good. And I think we're done with that chart. All right, let's just back out of here. And we'll add one more chart to this band. So let's have a look at the options. In this case, let's just make it pipe segments. Let's give it a Y value of 0. We know that this is a linear chart. And let's just give it a text function for the tooltip. And look at the display options. Line width of, let's make it a little longer, 7. Let's use random colors for this one as well. And I won't bother with a label. Save one more time. And let me just go back to the chart 3 options. And I think we're good to go. We've saved our work. Let me just double check that we have. Indeed. So now the next thing that we need to do is let's preview this in the sandbox and see what it looks like. So here we go. Let's go to the sandbox and choose our route, begin to end, and now we can see what we've configured here. So we have our ILI data, nothing fancy, not symbolized, no conditional symbology or anything like that as we had in some of our other templates or views. And here we can see we've got tooltips for our risk data sorted as 0 to 100. Of course, our ILI data is ordered from 0 to 12 depending on the o'clock position. Here we've got valves, we've got our pipe crossings, and we have our pipe segments down at the bottom with tooltips on them. Didn't add tooltips for the valves, but you can see I'm not really happy with the size of this one. So again, the user can just change that arbitrarily. So on the fly, now that looks better that we have a smaller band. And in a short period of time, we've configured data sources, we've added bands to a new view, and we've configured charts to add to those bands. In one case, 3 charts in a single band in the bottom one, so in the pipe properties. And we can see the labels, we can see the options here for the user to choose from. So the last thing that we have to do is now to deploy this to a viewer of our choice. So to deploy to a viewer, we need to go through a few simple steps. First one is if we look in the info, we can find out what the URL of this view is in our instance of ArcGIS Online. So we're going to need that ID to be able to configure it in a Geocortex viewer for HTML5 site. So let me just get out of here. I'm going to go to the viewer info. Here I've opened Geocortex Essentials Manager. I've got the site that we saw before already configured, and of course we do have inline configured in here. It's added to the I Want To menu, so let's just have a look at the I Want To menu. We can see down at the bottom we have the option to run inline. Let's just edit this. So this has 2 things in it, so we just call it run inline. It has a command to run workflow by URL and inputs, and the first is the URL of the inline workflow, and the second one are the inline items. So these are the IDs of the 2 views that we have configured. So I'm just going to cut that one out and paste in the ID of the view that we just configured. Click OK and apply my changes. Watch our little spinner while we're waiting, and done. So let me save the site and just go to our viewer, press refresh. Here, let's run inline as we did before. Hide our little nag. Let's select the route and the extent that we want to view. And voila, there's our new view. We now have the webinar view showing up in here, as well as our physical properties view as we had before. Just give us a little more real estate to be able to see these. Go back to the webinar view, and we can see just as we created it, it's configured and now up and running in a Geocortex viewer for HTML5. So in summary, Geocortex Inline visualizes your pipeline pods or UPDM or any data model as long as it's linear referenced dynamically. The graphical view designer allows you to easily create new views for your users. Your data always remains protected within your network. The Geocortex Inline runs in your browser from the Geocortex cloud environment, so you always have the latest version. And Geocortex Inline empowers your users by always giving them access to the most up-to-date integrity data. So for additional resources, you can go to our website or you can go to our Geocortex Tech Tips on YouTube. Thank you for your time today. It's been my pleasure to give you an introduction to Geocortex Inline.